I played golf all 4 years of high school, and no, I'm not talking about this kind of golf. I'm talking about the unbelievably challenging sport that comes on the TV in the living room on Sunday afternoons and everybody falls asleep on the couch watching it. I love the game of golf. But today, I want to tell you my biggest regret on the golf course. I want to tell you about one of my worst moments, a moment where I should have been tough as nails, but instead, I wasn't. It was the day before a tournament. Practice was about to start, and Coach called all of us together to remind us the top 5 scores turned in at the end of the practice would qualify for the tournament. And those 5 players would be excused from school the entire next day. Yes. I was a junior at the time and knew that all I had to do was beat a dozen or so underclassmen in order to qualify. The round began, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Hole number 3. It was a par 3, and on a par 3, it should take you 1 shot to get to the green and 2 putts to make your par. Well, my first shot went long, and it landed off the backside of the green. When I hit my second shot, I completely botched it, and the ball bounced off my pitching wedge like 3 feet in front of me. So frustrating. On my third shot, I hit it onto the green about 6 feet from the hole. I was now putting for a 4 on a par 3, which I guess isn't horrible, but it's not really good either. But then I end up missing that 6-foot putt, and I had to tap in for a 5. Here's where it gets worse. In high school golf, you're always paired with 2 or 3 other players. And at the end of each hole, everybody calls out their score and one player writes it down on a scorecard, and I was the scorekeeper that day. I called out my 5, the others called out their scores, and I wrote them all down. But as I started to pencil in my 5, I could feel the pride welling up in me. How could I have botched 2 shots like that? I'm such an idiot. I bet if I just wrote a 4, nobody would notice. I wrote a 4 on the scorecard, kept going. Well, we finished our round that day, and I still remember totaling up the scores. I couldn't believe it. A sophomore named Caleb had tied me. Just as I handed the scorecard over to my coach, Caleb decided to open his big mouth. He's like, "Hold on a second, Jared. It says here on the card on hole number 3, you got a 4. I'm pretty sure you said you got a 5 on that hole, right?" I was silent. I'd been called out. I knew I was in the wrong, and deep down, I knew what the right thing to do was. Before I could say anything, though, my coach spoke up. He grabbed the card. He looks at it. He's like, "The card says 4. Does anybody else want to call into question this score?" Coach turned and looked at the other guys we had played with. They both shook their heads no. "All right then," Coach said. "We'll decide a winner on a playoff hole." I still remember the look on Caleb's face when Coach made that decision. I looked into his eyes, and he knew that I knew I was lying. There should have never been a playoff that day. Caleb had won fair and square, but there was nothing he could do about it. I went on to beat him in the playoff. And the next day, Caleb went to school and I went to the tournament. 15 years later, I still can't forget that lie. Well, in this series, we're talking about what it means to be tough as nails. And I know that we tend to measure toughness by the physical things we do, but listen, toughness is so much more than that. True toughness is measured by the truth we tell. People who are tough as nails are truth tellers. Are you someone who, when the pressure is on, chooses to tell the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when others won't? Are you a truth teller? A man named Daniel lived this out. He was tough as nails. And right now, I'd like to share with you one of his toughest moments recorded in the book of Daniel, chapter 4. Daniel was an advisor to the most powerful king in the world at the time, King Nebuchadnezzar. And chapter 4 begins with Nebuchadnezzar kind of freaking out because he had had a dream. And he couldn't figure out what it meant. And dreams were considered a big deal in that culture. They always had a meaning. But what was it? I'd actually like for you all to read from the Bible a description of that dream in your groups. Your coach can go ahead and pull it up on their phone. Read Daniel chapter 4, verses 10 through 17. All right. So as you can probably tell, it's no wonder King Nebuchadnezzar was freaked out by this dream. But he had to be sure of its meaning. So he called for his royal advisors to come and interpret. The first group of advisors consisted of magicians, astrologers, enchanters, and sorcerers. Basically a bunch of creeps. Daniel chapter 4 verse 7 says that none of these dudes could tell the king the meaning. They were completely silent. And I find their silence very interesting. According to biblical scholars, these advisors should not have struggled to interpret this dream. After all, these men were considered to be some of the wisest men in the known world. It's probably not that they couldn't tell Nebuchadnezzar the dream. The dream was obviously referring to someone in power who was about to fall and lose everything. I wonder if the creepers knew the truth all along. They just weren't tough enough to tell it. Has there been a time in your life, maybe recently, where you've struggled to tell the truth? Why is it that you and me sometimes choose not to tell the truth? I'll give you 2 reasons. It's because telling the truth can make you feel uncomfortable, and telling the truth can also make the person you're telling it to uncomfortable. If you remember back to my golf story, had I told the truth about cheating, I would have looked bad in front of my friends, probably lost some respect, and potentially even been suspended by my coach from the team. If you tell the truth to your friends and family or teacher or coach, there will be times when you feel uncomfortable. Why is that? Well, it's because nobody wants to look bad in front of other people. We often lie to make ourselves look better than we actually are. Have you ever been there? Well, you may also be tempted not to tell the truth because you assume the person you're telling the truth to just won't handle it well. Have you ever tried to be honest with a friend about how something they said or did affected you? Have you ever had a close friend make some bad choices and you tried to go and talk to them about it? So uncomfortable. This is most likely the reason why the advisors chose not to interpret the king's dream. They feared that the truth would offend the king and cost them their jobs, maybe even their lives. Well, thankfully for you and me, we don't live in ancient Babylon, but truth-telling is just as important for us today. Truth-telling is what Jesus followers do. Listen, you guys, we embrace the uncomfortable, and we trust that telling the truth is not only what God wants us to do, but it's also what's best for us and best for those that we care about. Let's go back to the story. When the group of creepy advisors refused to interpret the dream, King Nebuchadnezzar called for the one man who he knew had a track record of truth-telling, a follower of God named Daniel. And in a very humble and gracious manner, Daniel approached King Nebuchadnezzar with the truth. The king was, in fact, the tree from the dream that would be struck down. And for 7 years, God would humble the king until he learned his lesson. Once Daniel finished explaining the dream, he urged Nebuchadnezzar to change his ways, humble himself, and honor God. But as you'll read with your groups later on, he didn't listen. And this is just where I'm going to press pause on the story. But I want to ask you one more time. Are you, like Daniel, a truth teller? What's the benefit of being a truth teller anyways? Well, I'll share 2 benefits, and whether you're a Jesus follower or not, these are 2 benefits that come from when we tell the truth. Number 1, Telling the truth gives you a clear conscience. Here's what I mean by that. When you tell the truth, you don't have to hide. You know that sophomore who I lied to at golf practice, Caleb? For months, I couldn't even look him in the eye. I was scared. And some of you right now are living in a lie. And that lie is just weighing heavy on your conscience. There's somebody that you're lying to, something you've been keeping from someone, and it's hard to even look at that person, isn't it? Students, listen to me. Hiding is not God's plan for you. Living with a clear conscience in freedom is God's plan for you. The second benefit of being a truth teller goes like this. Telling the truth keeps you whole. You see, lies always divide you. When you lie, you have to remember it and try to keep up with it, which is exhausting. And the scary thing is, one lie often leads to another, and before long, you forget what you said way back then. You lose track of the truth altogether. You don't even know who you are anymore because you just lie your way through life. And this describes where some of you are in your life right now. You don't feel whole anymore, just divided by all the lies that you're trying to keep up with. Students, God loves you. And he desires for you to be whole. How do you get there? Well, only Jesus makes people whole. In fact, one of the most famous lines Jesus ever said goes like this: "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." That's John 8:32. Telling the truth is part of what makes you whole. Today in your small groups, God is challenging those of you who are hiding or feel divided by a lie to begin walking the path of being a truth teller. Maybe that starts with you speaking up in small group today. Maybe you'll need to ask your coach if you can have a conversation with them in private later. Perhaps you'll need to have an honest conversation with mom or dad or a friend. I pray right now that God would give you toughness. You can live with a clear conscience, and the truth can make you whole again. This is a big way that Jesus has worked in my story, and I know he wants to make truth-telling a part of your story too. A new chapter starts right now. What story will you tell?